Okay, let's unpack this. We often think about power as something held exclusively by, a select few. The people at the very top, right? The ones with the most money, the biggest titles, maybe the loudest megaphones. But what if I told you that power, true influence, is far more diffused, far more subtle, and frankly, far more surprising than we typically imagine? Today, we're diving deep into a fascinating piece of material that absolutely challenges our conventional understanding of power. It's titled The Price of Power, and it's going to make us rethink not just who holds influence, but what it truly costs to wield it, both for the individual and, well, for society. This isn't just about high level politics or, immense wealth. It's about the subtle, often overlooked ways power manifests in everyday life and the profound impact it has on individuals and the intricate tapestry of society itself. Our mission today is basically to extract the core insights and those undeniable aha moments from this text. We want to ensure you walk away truly well informed, maybe with a fresh perspective on how influence operates all around you.
Yeah, and what's truly fascinating here is that this material doesn't just give you a sort of textbook definition of power. Instead, it really delves into its hidden dimensions and explores the often overlooked price that, inevitably comes with it. We'll be connecting the dots between what might seem like vastly disparate examples. I mean, everything from a quiet individual's control over a small piece of land to the immense reach of a social media influencer. Our aim is really to illuminate how power operates in unexpected corners of our lives, shaping outcomes in ways we rarely consider. This isn't merely an academic exercise, right? It's about understanding the practical mechanisms of influence that shape our world every single day, often beneath our conscious radar. The material truly challenges us to look beyond the obvious seats of power, the boardrooms, the legislative chambers, and recognize the potent forces at play in seemingly ordinary or even overlooked situations. And this raises an important question for us to grapple with throughout this deep dive. Is power ultimately a gift, or is it a burden? By the end of our conversation, you'll undoubtedly have a much clearer picture and perhaps a completely new perspective on how you perceive influence in the world around you, especially recognizing those hidden costs that often accompany it.
That sets us up perfectly because, yeah, when we talk about power, our minds naturally jump straight to the highest offices: presidents, prime ministers, mega CEOs, or perhaps even, media moguls who shape public opinion. But as you alluded to, our source material immediately challenges this very narrow view. It shows us that power isn't limited to just the wealthy or the elected. It can, in fact, appear in truly surprising and, well, unassuming places. So, to illustrate this, just imagine someone who owns just one property, okay? It could be a small plot of land, perhaps a quiet little house nestled somewhere in a rural area, nothing outwardly impressive or, financially significant in the grand scheme of things. Yet then comes the news. A massive infrastructure project, maybe a new cross-country pipeline or a major highway expansion is planned, and it's set to cut right through this individual's unassuming property. Now, our deep dive reveals something astonishing. This individual's disapproval alone, their simple no, can, in many cases, halt the entire multi-million or even multi-billion dollar development. Now, think about that. This person isn't some high-powered lobbyist. They don't command vast financial resources. They're just a property owner. But their control over that single, specific, strategically located resource gives them disproportionate and, frankly, immense leverage. What we're seeing here is a quintessential example of what the material calls latent power. It's a form of influence that exists quietly, often unrecognized, just sort of lying dormant until very specific circumstances activate it. It's not about what they've built, how many employees they manage, or what titles they hold in the traditional sense. It's purely about a unique positional advantage, a bottleneck, really. Their single refusal, that one defiant no, can unravel years of meticulous planning, halt millions of dollars in investment, and completely derail the ambitions of powerful corporations or even government agencies. It forces us to profoundly question our assumptions about where true influence actually resides, and to recognize that power can be far less about grand titles or overt displays of force, and much more about critical points of control, whether it's land, a unique skill, or even specific information. Think about it. In your own life or community, have you ever seen a seemingly insignificant individual or small detail unexpectedly shift a huge plan, demonstrating that quiet power? It completely upends our usual idea of where power lies, often in places we'd least expect.
Absolutely. And expanding on that idea, the material points to the emergence of what you might call the new titans of influence, right? Particularly evident in the digital realm and through the potent force of collective action. Consider for a moment someone who holds no traditional wealth, no political office, but commands millions of online followers across various social media platforms. The material highlights that their criticisms, their opinions, maybe their endorsements, can reach a vast global audience almost instantaneously. What's even more significant is how traditional media outlets, desperate to tap into this reach or respond to public sentiment, may find themselves compelled to amplify the influencer's message, thereby granting it an even wider reach and a new layer of perceived legitimacy. This widespread online commentary can then directly influence politicians, elected officials, even corporate decision-makers, compelling them to address issues they might have otherwise ignored or, dismissed. This dynamic profoundly challenges the old guard of media and influence, where information flow is tightly controlled by a select few gatekeepers. This form of power is distinct because it's based purely on audience engagement, direct communication, and the ability to mobilize public sentiment at an unprecedented speed and scale. It completely bypasses many of the traditional filters and established hierarchies. It unequivocally demonstrates that reach, even without traditional wealth or political office, is an incredibly potent and, disruptive form of leverage in the modern era. And while digital reach is one new titan, the material also gives us another equally powerful example of collective action. The sudden and transformative influence of unionized workers, let's say within a seemingly small food chain. Overnight, their elected representative, an individual who might have previously just been another employee, gained significant, often surprising influence. This individual will now have the legitimate capacity to bargain on behalf of the entire group, capable of halting production, organizing strikes, or ceasing work altogether until specific demands are met. This isn't individual power. It is the sheer raw force of collective power, and it's absolutely transformative. It vividly illustrates how the act of organizing, uniting individuals with shared interests under a common banner, can create a force far greater than the sum of its individual parts. This sudden shift in influence through collective organization impacts not only economic dynamics by directly affecting a company's operations, profitability, even its public image, but also broader social dynamics by giving a powerful, undeniable voice to those who might otherwise be marginalized or unheard. It powerfully highlights that power isn't solely top-down, flowing from established hierarchies. It can also be built from the ground up, through solidarity, shared purpose, and strategic collective action. So in a world increasingly shaped by both digital reach and collective organization, how do you think these new power dynamics ultimately impact our daily lives and the major decisions made on our behalf by those in traditional positions of authority? These are truly transformative forces, constantly reshaping our political and economic landscapes in real time.
That's a fascinating progression, yeah. From the quiet power of a single landowner to the amplified voice of an influencer or the collective might of a union, it really expands our definition of power beyond just controlling resources or leading large groups, doesn't it? It moves us into something even more subtle, yet incredibly potent: the power of discretion within established authority structures. Our sources offer a very tangible, everyday example to illustrate this. A police officer who observes a speeding vehicle. Legally, they have the power and, importantly, the discretion to act. They could simply let it go, deciding it's not worth the stop, maybe. Or they could engage. Now, if they stop the car and realize a famous or wealthy individual is inside, they have a choice. They can choose to issue a verbal warning, perhaps letting them off with a stern lecture and a quick reminder of the law, or they can strictly enforce the law, meticulously documenting the infraction, potentially leading to a significant ticket or even an arrest, especially if the individual resists or, impedes an investigation. This isn't about setting broad public policy or commanding an army. It's about the highly localized, immediate power to make critical choices within a given authority. Choices that can profoundly impact an individual's life, their reputation, or even their freedom. It highlights that power isn't just about having the law on your side or the rules written clearly. It's crucially about how one chooses to apply those laws and rules, based on their judgment, the specific circumstances, and, sometimes even unspoken biases. We've all, at some point, encountered situations where someone in authority has exercised their discretion, right? Whether it's a traffic stop, a customer service decision, or even a teacher deciding on a consequence. It genuinely makes you stop and think about the immense responsibility that comes with even seemingly small amounts of power, and how that discretion ultimately impacts fundamental concepts like fairness, equity, and justice in our everyday interactions. It's a quiet but incredibly potent form of influence, often wielded without much public awareness. What do you think this reveals about the human element in the exercise of power?
Oh, it reveals everything, doesn't it? The human element is absolutely central. And now, having sort of redefined what power is and where it can be found, our material pivots to perhaps the most significant and often overlooked aspect: the profound effect on the individual who wields it, what the text so aptly calls the price of power. And the most significant price of power is almost always the profound, often devastating loss of privacy, once an individual steps into the public eye or assumes a position of significant influence. Once someone steps into that intense glare of the spotlight, whether through fame, a high-profile political office, or even just becoming a prominent voice online, our material highlights just how dramatically, and often irrevocably, their life changes. Can they still simply dine anonymously at a local restaurant, enjoying a quiet meal with their family without being recognized, photographed, or interrupted? Can they freely express spontaneous opinions on social media as they once did in their private life, without immediate, overwhelming scrutiny, analysis, and often, frankly, vicious attack? The answer, devastatingly, is almost always an emphatic no. Their ability to navigate personal or legal troubles privately diminishes almost entirely, if not completely evaporates. A truly private life becomes nearly impossible, as even the most intimate personal matters, their relationships, their health, their family history, their past mistakes, become subjects of endless public discussion, dissection, and often severe judgment. They face constant, often intense, and frequently unhinged criticism from all sides, some positive, some objective, but much of it negative, deeply personal, and even outright destructive. Think about it. Their appearance, their words, their tone of voice, their past affiliations, their children's activities, their spouses' careers. Everything becomes fodder for endless public debate, speculation, and often outright fabrication. Walking in public without security or bodyguards may no longer be a viable option. The very sense of personal safety and spontaneity can just evaporate. The constant public scrutiny means they are no longer truly private individuals. They forfeit the fundamental right to anonymity and personal space that most of us just take for granted in our daily lives. For those of us who deeply cherish even a sliver of personal privacy, imagining this level of relentless, constant exposure, this living under a microscope, it's truly eye-opening, almost suffocating. It compels us to consider if the allure of influence, the opportunity to make a difference, is genuinely worth this immense personal sacrifice, this total, often irreversible erosion of your personal sphere and sense of self. It's not just a loss of anonymity, but a forced public persona that can lead to profound feelings of inauthenticity and isolation. And tragically, this relentless scrutiny can extend to their families who are unwillingly thrust into the same harsh spotlight, facing judgment and criticism simply by association.
That's a powerful point. The sheer psychological burden of that constant performance and scrutiny. It sounds incredibly demanding. And it leads directly into the next burden of power the material outlines. The immense demands of self-control. This isn't just about the external erosion of privacy, but the internal battle to maintain one's composure and integrity under relentless pressure. Our material poses critical questions. Can one truly control their immediate, raw reactions to constant, often unfair provocation? Can they maintain their authentic self amidst unrelenting public scrutiny and often, character assassination? The text implies this is a fundamental, almost superhuman challenge. Every casual word, every gesture, every personal decision made, no matter how minor, is analyzed, criticized, and often distorted or weaponized against them. This constant pressure necessitates an extraordinary level of self-discipline, far beyond what most individuals ever encounter in their private lives. Ultimately, the material stresses a fundamental truth that holds true for everyone, but is amplified exponentially for those in power. Individuals are profoundly responsible for their actions. And for those wielding influence, these actions don't just affect them personally. They have a profound, cascading ripple effect on others, on entire communities, on organizations, or even on nations. This isn't just about personal conduct or private morality. It's about the immense, far-reaching impact of decisions made under such intense public gaze. Furthermore, the material highlights the immense, often painful necessity of making unpopular decisions for the greater good. Even if it means losing friends, alienating staunch supporters, and facing widespread public disapproval. Sometimes, a leader must prioritize the long-term benefit and stability of a larger group over immediate popularity, personal comfort, or even loyalty to those closest to them. The text vividly describes how people who once showed genuine affection, who were once staunch supporters, can turn against you overnight for simply choosing what is perceived as right, even if it's the necessary strategic course of action for the collective good. This isn't some hypothetical scenario. It's a very real and agonizing price of leadership. It's the intensely personal cost of putting principle and public duty above personal connections and emotional ties. When we, as observers, see public figures navigate scandals or make incredibly tough calls that seem to alienate their base, it's often easy to judge from the outside, right? To see only betrayal. But this deep dive truly helps us understand the immense internal pressure they face, the psychological toll of constantly having to choose between personal comfort and public duty, and the very real personal sacrifices often involved in wielding significant influence. It's truly a lonely path, marked by constant self-monitoring and the crushing weight of genuinely consequential decisions.
It truly paints a picture of a life lived under an almost unbearable burden. And building on that, what's fascinating here is how the material addresses a very common cognitive mistake people make, especially in the political sphere, what it calls the failure to grasp the duality of things. When we support a person or a political cause, we often, perhaps instinctively, fall into the trap of assuming they are purely good, entirely benevolent, completely devoid of any negative aspects or necessary compromises. We create an idealized version in our minds, but in reality, the material stresses, individuals, and even grand causes or movements possess both good and bad aspects. They exist on a spectrum, and sometimes they can even appear to switch between them depending on the context. This simplistic black and white view sets us up for inevitable disappointment, disillusionment, and a profound sense of perceived betrayal. For instance, imagine you passionately advocate for a specific political cause, a clear vision for change, and you entrust a particular individual to implement those changes. That person, once in a position of power, may quickly encounter significant, even intractable, resistance from opposing factions, established institutions, or just the sheer complexities of reality. They might be forced to modify the original objectives, to compromise on cherished ideals, or to scale back ambition significantly just to achieve any progress at all. This can, and often does, lead to profound feelings of betrayal among their most ardent supporters, who see only the deviation from the original pure vision and not the difficult political reality. But the material stresses the absolute importance of recognizing that not every desired outcome can be achieved in its pure, unadulterated form. The political reality, the act of governing, is inherently messy. It's a constant negotiation of conflicting interests and limited resources, and this extends to personal relationships too. Publicly criticizing that person who had to compromise could easily lead to the permanent loss of a friendship, transforming a trusted ally into an enemy, simply because they had to adapt to achieve something rather than nothing. The text points out that nothing is entirely pure in this world, and not every seed planted will yield a perfect, unblemished harvest. If both parties involved in such a dispute are publicly known, say a politician and a prominent activist, this situation can escalate rapidly. It can lead to vicious character assassination, public name-calling, and retaliatory political actions that cause lasting damage. The personal literally becomes intensely political, driven by public perception, the demands of loyalty from one's base, and the unforgiving nature of the spotlight. This really makes you deeply consider how we perceive our leaders and the movements we support. Are we perhaps expecting an impossible purity? Are we holding them to an unattainable standard of unyielding principle in a complex world that constantly demands negotiation, adaptation, and difficult trade-offs? It challenges us to reconsider what success truly looks like in these profoundly complex scenarios, and to appreciate the difficult choices that often lie beneath the surface of seemingly simple political actions. It's a fundamental misunderstanding, really, of how the world often operates.
That's such a crucial insight. It highlights that the price of power isn't just internal and personal, it's also deeply woven into the very fabric of democratic governance. So, what does this all mean for how power actually operates within a system like a democracy? Well, the material states that the price of power extends profoundly beyond personal costs. It inherently includes the legislative roadblocks and systemic frustrations politicians constantly encounter. In a democracy, unlike, say, an authoritarian regime, unilateral action is generally not possible, nor is it desirable. And this isn't an accidental oversight, nor is it some kind of flaw in the system. It's a fundamental, intentionally designed feature. The system is meticulously built on a framework of checks and balances precisely to disperse power, to fragment it, and to prevent any single individual, party, or faction from consolidating too much authority or acting without broad consent. And this leads to another fascinating aspect. The price of power often necessitates forming what our material vividly calls unholy alliances. Forming alliances with individuals or groups that might otherwise be considered opponents, adversaries, or even outright enemies. Now, this isn't necessarily a sign of weakness or hypocrisy or some moral failing. Rather, it's precisely how the system is designed to compel collaboration, compromise, and negotiation for the collective benefit of the nation, even if it feels, well, jarring to observers. In a representative democracy like the United States, for example, laws are deliberately structured to encourage individuals with deeply differing viewpoints to find common ground, to bridge divides, and to build consensus. This means that elected officials, regardless of their personal ideologies or campaign promises, must engage with those who vehemently disagree with them. Understanding their perspectives, incorporating their concerns, and making concessions, even if doing so frustrates the very majority who elected them. It forces them by design to consider and represent the minority, ensuring that their voices are not neglected and their interests are at some level addressed. A vivid and foundational example of this dynamic is the United States electoral system itself. The president isn't elected purely by popular vote alone, but through the complex mechanism of the Electoral College. This system, which can often be a source of national debate and frustration, serves a very specific purpose. It prevents densely populated areas like New York City or Los Angeles from solely dictating national politics and effectively marginalizing the concerns of smaller states like Tennessee or Wyoming. It ensures that rural voices and less populous regions also have a crucial say in both the Senate and the presidency, thereby compelling national leaders to build broad coalitions across diverse geographic and demographic lines. This is where the true price of power in the United States really begins. Elected officials, regardless of whether they are Republican or Democrat, cannot simply act as they please. Even if they believe they have strong mandates or overwhelming popular support in their specific district or state, they must prioritize all citizens, not just those who voted for them, and they are consistently forced to consider and accommodate opposing viewpoints to pass meaningful legislation. Without a highly unlikely supermajority in both houses of Congress, they are perpetually engaged in a painstaking, often exhausting process of negotiation, concession, and compromise. So, the next time you hear about seemingly endless gridlock in government, this deep dive helps us understand that it's often a fundamental feature, not a bug, of a system specifically designed to protect minority voices, prevent unchecked executive power, and ultimately compel compromise, whether we like the outcome or not. That very compromise is a core, unavoidable component of the price of democratic power.
It's a compelling argument for the wisdom, if sometimes frustrating wisdom, of the system's design. And if we connect this to the broader picture, the material highlights how public opinion polls frequently reflect the deep-seated frustrations inherent in this very system. We often see Congress facing consistently lower approval ratings than the president, particularly in the initial years of a presidential term. And much of this is because they are actively fulfilling their role in the checks and balances. They are obstructing the president's legislative agenda, not necessarily out of pure malice, but until their own demands or the demands of their constituents are met. This isn't just political gamesmanship, it's the checks and balances in action. It's each branch vying for influence and leverage, ensuring no one branch becomes too powerful too quickly. Then perhaps after midterm elections, we might see the president's approval ratings decline. Not necessarily because they've suddenly become ineffective, but because, despite their efforts to gain majorities or push their agenda, they still face significant challenges in legislating precisely as desired. These pervasive frustrations regarding the slow pace and apparent imbalance of power can indeed be deeply disheartening for many citizens who just want to see swift progress on issues important to them. They observe inaction and gridlock, and they often interpret it as a fundamental failure of leadership or maybe a breakdown of the system. However, the material emphasizes a critical point that often gets completely lost in the daily political discourse, especially in, an age of instant gratification and ideological purity. Without these fundamental checks and balances, the country would likely face profound instability, perhaps even civil unrest every 2 years. The friction, the perceived inefficiencies, the painstaking need for compromise, these are not flaws to be eliminated through quick fixes. They are, in fact, essential safeguards. They are the deliberate mechanisms designed to slow down drastic, potentially ill-conceived changes to force comprehensive deliberation, and to ensure that a truly broad consensus is required for any significant lasting shifts in policy. It's a design frustration, yes, but it is unequivocally for the sake of stability, to protect against the tyranny of a simple majority, and to prevent sudden, destructive swings in power that could fragment the nation. So while it's undeniably easy to get frustrated with the slow pace of change, or with the constant back and forth in political maneuvering, this perspective reminds us that the very friction we observe is precisely what keeps the whole system from spinning out of control. It's a crucial trade-off for preventing civil unrest and maintaining a crucial degree of equilibrium and long-term viability in an incredibly diverse nation.
That's an incredibly vital perspective, making us consider the broader, more profound purpose behind what often just feels like political dysfunction. And this brings us to the ultimate test of power, the profound insight that ties all these threads together, from the individual landowner to the complexities of a democratic system. So, what does this all mean at its core? Our material emphasizes that whether one is a president, a senator, a governor, or even a local police officer, a wealthy individual with vast connections, or an influential figure within a specific community, the true measure, the deepest price, and the ultimate test of power lies not in what one can do, but in what one restrains oneself from doing. This holds true regardless of how unpopular the right decision might be, or how provocative, frustrating, or even outright insulting adversaries might act. This insight fundamentally shifts the definition of strength from mere capability or the ability to impose one's will, to a higher standard of self-discipline and ethical decision-making. It profoundly challenges our conventional notions of power, which often celebrate overt action, bold moves, and the forceful imposition of one's agenda. The material makes a critical and nuanced distinction here. While legal justification might exist for certain actions, granting an individual the lawful authority to proceed, those actions may not always be moral, ethical, or inherently good for the broader society in the long run. It is therefore absolutely crucial not to abuse power for malicious purposes, to serve purely personal desires, or even to simply enact the will of a vocal majority if that action is not ultimately beneficial for the country or the community in the long run. This requires a level of foresight, integrity, and personal sacrifice that goes far beyond simply adhering to the letter of the law or satisfying one's immediate base. It demands a steadfast commitment to a higher ethical standard, a sense of responsibility to a vision larger than oneself or one's immediate constituents. This is a truly profound idea, isn't it? It challenges us to look beyond overt actions and instead consider the quiet, often unacknowledged strength of restraint. The wisdom of holding back when you could easily push forward, the courage to choose the harder, more principled path. It truly makes us think about what genuine leadership really demands. Not just the capacity to act decisively, but the profound wisdom to discern when not to, and the discipline to follow through on that restraint.
It's an idea that truly resonates, and what's fascinating here is how the material brings this abstract concept to life with such a vivid and foundational historical example. George Washington, the first president of the United States. His immense popularity, stemming from his undisputed leadership in the War of Independence and his role in forging the new nation, was so pervasive that he could have easily allowed himself to be crowned a king or emperor. I mean, really.
Oh, really?
Indeed, many within the newly formed nation, including some of his own loyal officers, were ready, even eager, for him to take a crown, following powerful European precedents where victorious generals established dynasties. There was an enormous temptation to consolidate absolute power and rule indefinitely. Yet for the enduring good of the nascent nation, Washington chose a radically different path. He chose not to emulate the very monarchs he had just fought against to secure America's freedom. He could have consolidated power indefinitely, basking in the adoration and unparalleled authority. Instead, in an act that defined American leadership for centuries, he intentionally chose to serve only one 4-year term, and later a second, but then famously stepped down. He deliberately allowed others the opportunity to lead and govern, demonstrating a profound, unprecedented commitment to the Republican ideal over personal glorification or continued reign. He consciously sacrificed his ego, his pride, and his personal comfort for the survival and flourishing of the nation. Understanding that the peaceful, voluntary transfer of power was far more vital to the health of the fragile young republic than his own continued presence, no matter how beloved he was. The material powerfully concludes that in remembering George Washington and his unparalleled act of self-restraint, we should learn from his profound wisdom. We should strive to avoid actions that divide the nation, harm others, or serve purely personal desires for power or satisfaction. This ultimately is the real enduring price of power. The willingness to put the collective good above individual ambition, to exercise immense restraint even when limitless power, absolute authority, and unbridled popularity are firmly within your grasp. Washington's choice wasn't just a moment in history, it was a foundational act that truly defined the very nature of American leadership, prioritizing democratic principles and the spirit of civic duty over the seductive allure of personal authority. It's a powerful, timeless reminder that sometimes the greatest strength, the truest measure of power, is knowing when to step back, to yield, and to serve a higher purpose.
So we've taken a deep dive into the price of power, and it's become profoundly clear that power is far more complex, far more pervasive, and significantly more costly than we initially imagined. We've seen how it exists in surprising, often hidden places, from that single landowner holding the fate of a massive project, to the amplified voice of a social media influencer, to the quiet yet potent discretion of a public official. These examples demonstrate that true influence is not exclusive to traditional elites, but is diffused throughout society in fascinating ways. We've explored in depth how wielding any form of significant influence comes with a profound personal cost. That relentless erosion of privacy, the immense psychological burden of constant scrutiny, the extraordinary demands of self-control, and the painful, often solitary necessity of prioritizing the greater good, even when it means alienating friends, facing public disapproval, and enduring intense personal attacks. We've also navigated the intricate political maze, understanding that democratic systems are intentionally designed with legislative roadblocks and a built-in need for what our material called those unholy alliances. These aren't flaws, right? But essential features that compel compromise, foster collaboration, and ensure broad representation, frustrating as that slow, often messy process can be. And finally, we've arrived at the profound, culminating insight that the true measure of power lies not in what one can do, not in exercising every available option, but in what one restrains oneself from doing. This ultimate test, exemplified so powerfully by George Washington's Selfless Act, is about ethical leadership, integrity, and making decisions that benefit the whole, rather than just a part, even when faced with overwhelming temptation or pressure.
Exactly. And if we connect all of these insights to the bigger picture, the profound understanding gained from this deep dive prompts us to consider something deeply personal. In an increasingly interconnected world where information flows freely and every individual has the potential for vast reach and unexpected influence, how does truly understanding the price of power change how you interact with those currently in positions of authority, those who wield power over you? And perhaps even more importantly, how does it change how you choose to wield your own forms of influence, however small or latent they may seem in your daily life? This raises an important question for you to ponder long after a conversation concludes. What form of power do you possess that you might not even realize you have? Perhaps it's your discretion in your professional role, your influence within a small community group, your ability to organize others, or even just your voice and reach online. And understanding its true cost, what price might come with wielding that power responsibly, with wisdom, ethical foresight, and most crucially, with restraint, for the greater good of those around you.